Hey everyone, welcome to a new video, welcome to my channel. My name is Maaike and today's video is going to be all about books that I would like to reread at some point in time. I am not someone who is an avid rereader of books, so that's why a lot of what you see behind me on these shelves is also quite new stuff. So what I tend to do is whenever I've read a book and I've rated it, unless I truly think it's either a stunning cover or if it's a really good read that just really stuck with me, that's when I would like to go back to a book perhaps at some point in time and like to reread it. That's when I hang on to books that I have already read. However, if a book was okay, it was fine, I enjoyed it, I liked reading it, but it didn't really like change my core being, you could say, or if it's not a book that has a really pretty cover, I don't really see the point of keeping it around. So that's why very often I declutter my shelves every couple of years or so to just get rid of the books that I've read that I feel I don't really need to keep around. So that's why I do not have that many books that I think, oh, I need to get back to that. Because very often I am not interested in rereading a book unless it really impressed me for whatever reason. And so for me, there's only like a couple of books that I go back to, and I'm not going to even mention Harry Potter as a series because that I think is one of my most reread things, especially a few years ago whenever I was like super duper stressed. In case you're a fellow teacher, you know that time right before summer break when everything just comes together and you're completely going out of your mind. That's when I would reread Harry Potter as like that safe comforting blanket to just have a bit of fun there. So I've reread the books several times. Also, as they were coming out, I would have forgotten what some of the books were about. So I think the first 4 books I must have read like 8 times or something. The full series, though, I haven't read as much completely, but I did listen to it on audio once, so that's definitely also on the list. But I just wanted to talk about 5 books that I have already reread and that I love because they are some of my favorite all-time books, and then 5 books that I haven't reread but that I think I would like to reread at some point. And one of those books I already mentioned on my channel before, but I just thought we could make a nice little split here of 10 books that are all about rereading. So let me talk about the books I have reread first. So as I mentioned, I don't necessarily reread books a whole lot. However, a book that has the status of most reread that isn't Harry Potter is a bit of a Marmite one, because I know a lot of people are forced to read this in school if they are in an Anglo-Saxon like country, it seems. English-speaking country, a lot of people have to read this and it's often banned and whatever. But The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and I'm not even sure why I've reread this so many times. I think I must have read it 4 times. And every single time I read this story, I just pick up something new. I know that Holden Caulfield as a character, that's the name of the main character in this book in case you're unfamiliar, he's an unreliable narrator, and I love unreliable narrators, so that's probably why I like this story so much. He is just the kind of character you love to hate, and I'm down. I'm all for it. In fact, I think I should do a video about that. Characters you love to hate. Maybe we can make that work next month. But yeah, The Catcher in the Rye is one of those stories that I just go back to, and I pick up something every time that I'm like, oh yeah, like if there's like little clues to like what happens in the end. And it's just, yeah, a lot of people read this at face value as just like a morose teenager who's lying through his teeth, and he's just a bit of an obnoxious character, so you do kind of like need to get through that sort of thing. But I just think it's a very clever book. I think it's very well written. I think it reads quite easily, so you can really take it at surface level and just have a story if you'd like. Not always enjoyable, but that's not the point of the story. So for me, I like books that, well, not necessarily make me work hard. I don't try to put it like that, but a book that really sort of catches on, and this is really one of those books that has that for me. So for me, I have reread this several times since my first read. I pick it up a lot over summer breaks. It's not too big, and I don't know why. I don't even know why. I have no like physical characteristics or emotional characteristics that I feel really are the same as our main character in this book, so I'm not even sure why. But I just really identified with parts of this book when I read it for the first time, and I think that's why I want to go back to it all the time too. So The Catcher in the Rye is definitely one I've reread the most outside of Harry Potter. And then we're getting, I think, sort of like on the same sort of benchmark. These two, I think I've reread this one twice and this one twice as well. So let's talk about this one first. This is God's Behaving Badly by Marie Phillips. This was a book, I'm not sure if you can still buy this, but this was a book that was always in the chick lit department of a bookstore, because it does have a bit of a romance in it. But I just think this is such a clever book, and I've had people read this who are not into romance, but who just really like the mythology retelling at the heart of this story. So in case you don't know what this book is about, this book is essentially about Greek gods that have moved to London in the 17th century after the Great Fire. London real estate was very cheap, and they needed a place to live because Mount Olympus, it wasn't really something they could keep up anymore, because their power started waning, and they're trying to figure out where their powers went. And so because they are sort of becoming more and more human, they also start to take human jobs. So we have Artemis, our main character, who is a dog walker. Apollo is a TV psychic. Dionysus has a bar. And you have all these little tidbits that are put in here. And then there is a cleaning lady that they hire, and she and her boyfriend end up being this Orpheus and Eurydice kind of like metaphor at a certain point, and it's hilarious. This is one of the funniest book I've ever read, and I think I've read this like 2 or 3 times. So it's just a really good one, and I think that by putting it and sort of marketing it as chick lit, I think this book was sold short. It's more of a like just general fiction kind of story for me, and yes, there is a romance, but I feel that you can really read this book and not focus on the romance too much. There's a lot of different plot lines going on, and all of these characters are just a little wacky, because that's what Greek gods usually are. So I just thought this was a really good one. I heard this was going to be turned into a movie, but then I never really saw it happening. I definitely would want it to happen. And this is one that's been out for years, so that's why I'm saying this is not a book that a lot of people talk about, but I really love it. And then the other book I was holding up is Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood. This is another Marmite book for sure. I know a lot of people who've read this and who absolutely thought it was hideous, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. And like I said, I like unlikable characters, unreliable narrators. I like crazy, like weird stories where not everything is explained away. I like it when there's loose ends, and when like I try to avoid saying like that my brain has to work, but sort of like that I get to fill in some of the story myself. I really enjoy that. I don't like things to be very neatly wrapped up with a bow at the end of a story, and where every character's reasoning for their action is explained all the time. And this is one of the reasons why I don't enjoy YA all the time, because I feel it's too much like trying to like make everything very nice and pretty. And I feel that especially on BookTube, books that do well on BookTube tend to fall into that category. But I love a book where there is just a little bit of mystery still left by the time I'm finished with it. And this book definitely is a mysterious one, because there's things going on, there's scenes in this book and you just read it and you go like, wait, what? How is this even related to the story? So this is a bit of a wacky one. We follow Hazel Motes, who has just come back from the Second World War, the end of the 1940s, and like early 50s maybe even. And he is living, is it South Carolina? It's like somewhere in the South. And there's like a religious component in this book that is also a bit wacky. And it's sort of very much exploring like the Deep South and like culture of the Deep South, but in a bit of a like wacky, over the top kind of way. So again, not one for the faint of heart, not one where you need to try and like explain everything. Just read it as is and then just sort of let it happen. This book is a ride. It is a ride, but it's not necessarily a ride that most people will enjoy, I'm sure. And then a book I reread last year, and it's a good thing that I did because I was very nervous about this one. This is A.M. Holmes's This Book Will Save Your Life. And if anybody had ever asked me, like, what is your favorite all-time book? I would say this. And I read this, when did I do my internship at the TV station? I once tried to do some journalism stuff. So I interned at a TV station one summer, and I think that was at the end of my master's degree, so that must have been like 2007, 2008, so again, it's been a while since I had read this, so I hadn't read it since. So last year I was like, but I've been recommending this book to people for years, and I wasn't entirely sure anymore on the specifics or why I really liked it. So last summer I went back to this and I read it in like 2 sittings. I mean, it's not the biggest book in the world, but I was so happy, and I understand now again why I like it so much. This is described as a combination of Catch-22 and The Catcher in the Rye. We get a completely different character in here. He's a man of middle age called Richard Novak. And there's just this event that happens in his life that kind of snowballs into all of these other events, and it's a little absurd. Again, lots of characters in this book that you just love to hate. You do have to enjoy that. And this is kind of like putting Hollywood, like LA living, under a microscope and then like blowing it out of proportion. So there's like crazy references to movies, and it's just like detox culture is everything, every sentence is just like ridicule, and I just really like it. This is a book that made me laugh out loud, and not a lot of books achieve that sort of status, so that's why I was very happy to have reread it, because I suddenly remembered again why I like it so much. So this is a great one, and it's definitely deserved its spot in the top position of my all-time favorite books for sure. And then the book that I put on my list to reread this year is Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. This was one of the first Neil Gaiman books I read, and Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors, so I was like, I need to reread some Neil Gaiman. And while I'd love to get stuck into American Gods again, that book was quite slow for like the first half or so. So I remember not really loving the first half, but then how everything played out and came together, I did really enjoy. So at some point, I want to go back to that, but I'm just not ready yet. So I was figuring maybe Neverwhere, because I remember reading this and really liking it. Again, it's in my top 10 favorite books of all time, but to be fair, I don't really remember a lot from the story. So I remember really sort of feeling like there were these Alice in Wonderland kind of moments in this book that I really liked, but I don't remember the actual story all that well. So that's why this is definitely on the list to reread for this year, because yeah, we just need to get back to this. I need to remind myself why I love it so much. And then for a stack of other books that I would love to reread, but that I know I won't be getting to anytime soon. So I've got 5 here for you. So I think I can breeze through these quite quickly. So Leslie Walton's The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender. This is about a girl who is born with wings, and it's this magical realism kind of story. It feels a bit YA at times, but it's sort of more this generational tale of like 3 women, and Ava Lavender, the girl with the wings, is sort of the last one in the line. But this was, I remember reading this on a super hot summer day in a single sitting. So again, I don't remember too much of the story, but I do really remember liking it. It's got a stunning cover, and I remember this was one of those books that I read off of YouTube recommendations that was successful for me. So I would like to get back to this at some point. At this point in time, I don't really need to. It's been, I think, 2 or 3 years since I read it, so not enough time has passed for me to really not remember anything. I still remember certain scenes very vividly from this book. But yeah, I remember really liking it. It's a very heartwarming, but also quite a heart-wrenching tale. at moments. So it's sort of like pulling you into all these emotional directions, but it still has that magical element to it, which is what I enjoyed. And then a book that I read last year, but I listened to it on audio, and this is going to come up in a future video because I'm going to do a mini book haul very soon. I did buy a couple of books in the past couple of months, but not too many because I haven't been reading a lot. But one book that I did pick up is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. And I read this on audio and I really liked it. I know not a lot of people like this book. Again, I tend to like books nobody else likes. But this was my favorite of the two. I read Normal People last year. And also this one. There were a couple of months apart. And I liked this better than Normal People when I was reading it. Again, like Catcher in the Rye, there were a lot of like aha moments for me in this story where I was like, oh yeah, I do that too. And that's one of the things that I really like about Sally Rooney, is that it's sort of like these observations of everyday people. And I really appreciate that. I just thought that Normal People took a very dark turn that I didn't see coming. Again, the first half of the book was super slow, and then things kind of sped up, and it was like, wait, what? Like these like what the moments, one after another. This never does that. So this I felt was a lot easier to digest, and it was just, I don't know, there were just all these moments where I was like, yeah, that could have happened to me, or it has happened to me as well. So a lot of recognition for me in this book for sure. And I just thought that this was a very, very good book, but I think that I would like to read it on the page if I want to go back to it, because I think that I might have missed parts from listening it as an audiobook. I tend to feel that way a lot about listening to an audiobook, which is why I do not tend to listen to a lot of fiction, but more so nonfiction, so that it's easier to go like dip in and out of the story. But yeah, Sally Rooney's Conversations with Friends, I would like to read as a real book, which is why I got myself a paper copy now that I did read it, and I enjoyed it. Another standalone that I would like to reread is The Street Philosopher by Matthew Plampin, and this is another one of his books that I haven't read in years, and it's one of my favorite historical fiction novels. This book is set in the late 19th century in Manchester, and it's about a journalist. He's the street philosopher of the title, and he is trying to figure out this, like, there's this heist story in here as well about like stolen art. It all has to do with the Crimean War, and at the time I was reading this, I knew nothing about the Crimean War and how sort of the journalists writing about the war really influenced also how people perceived the war and how things went. So now that I know more about this time period and what it actually did, I think I would like to go back to it as a more informed reader so that I might be able to pick up on more of what this story is actually trying to do, because there are so many historical actual facts that are in this story. This is the kind of historical fiction that isn't like mostly made up, but this is an author who did really fact check everything and really made sure that everything worked. So that was one of the things I really liked about the story to begin with, but I think I can appreciate this even more if I were to go back to it with the knowledge I have today. It is a bit big, so it's definitely, is it over 500 pages? No, it's close to 500 pages. There's just an over it, but the typeset, man. This is pretty small print. So that is definitely something that I need to get stuck into at some point. But I have so much historical fiction. I just put some books in front of it, but this shelf right here, it's a lot of historical fiction that I haven't read yet. So I need to first get to some new stuff before I can reread some of that. And then finally, I have two series that at some point in time I would like to reread. Not anytime soon, but they are two of my all-time favorite series. Lockwood and Co, just the entire series. It's 5 books, it's finished. Which is nice. This is the first book, The Screaming Staircase. This is YA, and it's YA, well, it's urban fantasy, I would say. And it's about an alternate universe in which ghosts exist, and they're a problem because you can die from ghost touch, and you have all these special agencies that go out at night to kill the ghosts and make them go away. And Lockwood Co is one of those agencies, and it's the only one that's not run by adults. They are teenagers who are sort of just taking care of their own affairs, and it's not always going as smoothly. But this is just a great, great story if you want sort of mystery and action, and you also want a great group of friends who are just not always, again, they're not always getting along. It's very sort of like real in that sense. And I just thought that the characters in this book were really well fleshed out, and the way the entire story came together over 5 books worked really well. I think the first 2 or 3 books were really more like you can read as standalones, but there is definitely an overarching plot line that ties all 5 books together. And that's why no other books have been written in this series for sure. But yeah, this was a great one, and it's one I picked up on a whim at my local bookstore because I thought the cover looked interesting. I thought, a castle? Is this like Victorian? What's going on? I didn't know. And a lady at the store also didn't know what this was, so I decided to just buy it. I read it, and I fell in love, and I read all 5 of them. So at some point, if I have like a nice long summer break at one time, I will just sit down and breeze through all 5 of these because these are really easy reads too. And finally, Ben Aaronovitch's Rivers of London series. This is by now, how many books are out in this series? I lost count. This is still ongoing. He's still writing books in this series. There's about 1 of them coming out like every year to year and a half. There are some novellas that have come out. There's an entire graphic novel range that ties into the entire storyline as well. I only read the first one that came out, and I wasn't a huge fan. So for me, the graphic novels, I'm like, do I really want to get stuck into those or not? I'm not entirely sure, but this is one of my all-time favorite fantasy series. Again, it's urban fantasy. It's about a police constable called Peter Grant who found out he can do magic, and then he needs to learn magic. And in the books, of course, his skills progress and he becomes more knowledgeable about the world of wizardry. And there's all these different magical creatures that make an appearance. The first book we learn that all the rivers have a personification that is sort of tied to it. It's just such a great diverse cast of characters as well, which I also really appreciate. He has been criticized for how he has written females in his stories, but he's definitely been working on that. I feel that the female characters in the later books are more fleshed out, and I get the critique, but these, again, super action-packed. They're fun. If you like that like British, dry, sarcastic kind of humor, it's sort of like Sherlock meets Harry Potter meets Luther. That's how I would characterize these. I love these, but there's still books coming out, but at some point I would like to go back to some of the first ones, because I remember reading not all of them in order because I didn't know this was a series when I started reading these. So there's a couple of books that I didn't really read in the correct order, so I would like to fix that. And there was one book, which is Broken Homes, which is I think the 4th or 5th one in the series, that I didn't enjoy as much, but a friend of mine loved it, and it's one of her favorites in the series. So I want to go back to this and see if I can love that one more, because I feel I may not have read it at the right time. You know how sometimes you read a book and it's just not the moment? I think that might have happened to that one. So for me, really great series, new books coming out like every couple of years, and he's on a roll, and more people should be talking about this on YouTube for sure. So that's why I wanted to give it another mention here. And there you have it. Those are the 10 books I wanted to mention in today's video. Books that I've reread or that I want to reread, and some of them I want to get to really fast, and others are sort of like, yeah, at some point in time I should get back to that at some point. But there are too many new things on these shelves for me to really focus on the old stuff. So yeah, that's why we're just going to stick to reading some new stuff for sure. And so we're going to be talking all about that in the wrap-ups that I do every single month. I hope you would like to stay tuned for all of that. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you next week with another video.